Did you know that if you were in the gifted and talented education program, you were in the top 5%? That means only 1 in 20 kids was considered gifted. So what does that mean? What did they want with us? Why are we all waking up now? I want to explore all of that in today's video, as well as share something that I found when I was doing some research the other day. I was trying to find the curriculum for when I attended GATE, which was in the 90s, and I couldn't find anything on the internet that said what we did, why we were taken out of class, if we did or didn't listen to the Gateway tapes. There was nothing. But what I did find was that my elementary school in Ohio still has a gifted program. And I saw some pictures online of them doing projects or attending conferences. And then I found a section on their website where they had permission slips for our parents to sign. And in these permission slips, it said that their child had tested in the top 95th percentile on standardized testing and or showed a remarkable capability in the creative or performing arts, or they had unusual behaviors or patterns that indicated advanced capabilities. So in order for them to do further testing on their child, they asked for permission to do further testing, but they didn't ever mention on any of those slips what the further testing was. I found that very interesting. And I also found it very interesting that each child who is in the gifted program, at least in the modern day gifted program today, has their own education plan. Now, I'm not sure if this is specific for the state of Ohio or if this is in other states too, but if you're a GATE kid or you were in the program, I encourage you to look at your school's curriculum, or maybe you're a better Googler than I am, and maybe you can find some buried information that I wasn't able to find. So I was very curious about what kind of testing they did on gifted kids. And again, I couldn't find anything. I was hoping to at least see something about the Gateway tapes or talking about the hearing test, but again, nothing. So what does that mean? Why do you think that they wanted to experiment on the top 5%? And what kind of tests do you think that they ran? According to all the research I've done and all the people that I've talked to who were in the gifted program, a lot of us remember the hearing test. We also remember the pink liquid. Something that came up for me the other day when I was doing the guided gifted meditation that is on my channel was I saw something about recess, but I also had a memory of a dream I had, at least I'm assuming it was a dream. It felt like a dream where I was in a big warehouse that felt like a classroom. And I remember the hallways, and I was seeing it from the eyes of a child. I felt very short in it, and I remember seeing a woman in a business attire who was sitting at a desk at the end of a hallway. So it looked like in my memory that the classrooms or the rooms of the warehouse had, why is there always a loud plane or a car driving by when I start talking about this stuff? Can you guys hear that? Should I wait for it to pass? I do live by an Air Force base, by the way. Do. I hope you can hear me. Come on, let's pass now. Okay. I'm not sure if that's passing anytime soon, but anyways, back to my dream about an odd warehouse. I'm assuming it was a dream, but what is interesting about that memory that just randomly came up during the Gate Kids meditation was that I had heard things from other gifted kids that they potentially were doing dream work exercises with us, or we were traveling to other dimensions in our dreams, apparently. I've also heard some crazy theories about how they were teaching gifted kids to pilot UAFs in their dreams, or that they had entire secret schools in their dreams. So is that why they were playing the Gateway tapes for us? Because they were trying to induce out-of-body experiences in the astral realm, and since we were children, we were more susceptible to this. But the other crazy thing about my personal experience is I remember being in my school's gymnasium in my dreams often, where I would be flying, and I literally felt like I could really fly in real life. Like I had a technique that I practiced where I would run and then jump, just kind of like glide and take off like a plane and flying. But it was in my school's hallways that I had these flying dreams, and then in my school's gymnasium. I remember having that dream a couple times. So that maybe that dream is unrelated, but if we're gonna go down a crazy rabbit hole conspiracy, could it have been that we were literally doing classes in the astral realm? Because I've heard other people talk about this too. They remember flying and they remember their ESP experiences happening in their classroom, almost like they were taken to the same place in a dream state and tested then. So I don't know, that's a crazy theory to explore, but it also makes me think of the Montauk tapes. And if you haven't seen my video about Montauk Point, that was a crazy experience that happened to me in my adulthood a couple months before this gate stuff came out and I had any memory of it. I had a song called Play Crack the Sky by Brand New woke me up in the middle of the night, and I kept hearing the lyrics. We sent out the SOS call. It was 4:15 in the morning. The storm broke the second anchor line. And then they mentioned Montauk Point in the first verse of the lyrics, which is what stuck out to me. And what was crazy about that song is that I kept waking up at 4:15, which is the exact time they mentioned this song. So I won't go too much into what I talked about in that video, but basically I was talking about, I stumbled upon information that told me about I think it was Camp Hero, and how they were doing tests on psychic kids, and it's what the show Stranger Things was based off of. So they were hooking up gifted children to these machines or ET tech, and I don't know if they were using their minds or their abilities to open other portals or what. But I thought that was all crazy. And I have a couple of different theories, like why were we tested? But one of the things I want to know, and I'd love to hear your guys' perspective in the comments and have a conversation about this, but did they target us because we already had the ESP, or did they teach us the ESP? Did I grow up to be a remote viewer psychic because of the gateway tapes, because I was played them in childhood and I don't remember? Is that like, why do I have a huge missing gap in my memory? And why do I have trauma and PTSD symptoms and I don't really remember exactly what happened to me as a kid? That is extremely disturbing. So that could either mean that I had such a traumatic experience that I just literally blacked it out and my brain won't let me remember it at all, or maybe there's some truth to these conspiracies that the fluoride water was erasing our memories. Maybe there's also some truth to the MK Ultra theory that the GATE program was an offset of the Gateway Project, which I believe was training people to be remote viewing spies. It was happening during the Cold War. I think we were trying to catch up with like China and the Soviet Union. And it was, I think it might've been, I'm not sure if this is around the same time that the Roswell, New Mexico UAF stuff or UFO stuff was coming out, or if it was around the same time that they were doing MK Ultra experiments in the 70s. But if you know anything about MK Ultra, I always share the same article and talk about it in my videos because it just was this article I found randomly by chance, and it was absolutely shocking. Like, if there's any truth to that article that, a supposed whistleblower said about all the programming that's taking place sorry, it is hot in here, guys. But if there's any truth to that article about the programming that's being done on a mass scale, then it's incredibly frightening, especially because they have a list of substances and chemicals. So like, even things like, I don't know if Benadryl specifically is on there, but like things like that. I remember it's like medications, caffeine, probably marijuana is on that, alcohol, like all of these effects of what different herbs and different medications and different chemical compounds do to the mind and their effect on their ability to control us. So what I think is super interesting, that about half the GATE kids ended up having a substance abuse issue. Not to mention that when you have a substance abuse issues, your dopamine becomes fried because you have to keep doing that thing over and over again. But then if you think about social media, which isn't a drug, your body on social media acts like a drug because we're always trying to clear those notifications. The red does something to the brain. It's like a very active color. So, it's also the color that is used for alerts a lot of the time. I just realized I'm wearing a lot of red. but yeah, red has to do with alerting people. So that's an interesting thing to think about. But back to my question, it's like, did we have these abilities before we were tested, or were we picked because we had the intuitive capabilities or the blank slate, a blank enough slate to be able to develop these abilities? But I don't know about you guys. I think it is common for a lot of GATE kids, because I've talked to a lot of people in my GATE group who grew up even before they were 1 year old. Like they were already talking or walking. They usually had advanced capabilities as an infant. Like some of them remember being in the womb and coming out of the womb. Like they remember this stuff vividly. So it's also kind of a question of, well, at least in my case, like apparently my physician told my parents to go get tested at psychiatrist's office, so they were running tests on me as an infant. I don't remember any of this. I mean, I vaguely have a memory of being in a room with like a lot of red, yellow, blue colors. And I remember I also had an eye issue, so early surgery on my eye as a child before I could even talk and tell them, hey, I'm blind in one eye. Would I have even known if I was blind in one eye? Am I blind in one eye because of the surgery they performed on me as an infant? Missing part of my retina, which leaves some light open. So the light that's opening, is that why I have psychic abilities? Because I also have psychic friends who have a lack of hearing, a lack of perfect hearing, and they have more spiritual senses than your normal everyday people. They can see into the spirit world in the same way or similar way that I can. We're both very sensitive, but we both have disabilities, right? Or retinal, or what is it called? A congenital birth defect, which is what mine is called. So that is really interesting, right? And I know I'm not the only one who had some kind of early childhood surgery. And I've talked about in other videos too, like a lot of people have this theory, like when we had that early childhood surgery where we implanted with something, is that why we're getting tinnitus or like the ringing in the ears? Is the ringing in the ears from the gateway test or the gateway tapes that we listened to or the hearing tests that we took in school, right? Like there's so many unanswered questions and you could just keep going down this rabbit hole forever and ever. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to mention or if I just want to jump into the implications of what that could all mean. Because essentially there's a lot of unanswered questions about why we were tested, what they wanted with us, and several running theories were like, okay, maybe they wanted to recruit us for use in the military or Mensa, which a lot of people who were in the GATE program were already recruited by those agencies. Others of us have been recruited by either secret societies or people who worked for the CIA or some kind of government program who were trying to recruit us in adulthood. And the scary thing about that is that a lot of the people who come in to try to recruit you, they come in using techniques like neuro-linguistic programming, and they use very manipulative techniques where they want you to put your guard down. So they kind of tend to overshare a lot in the beginning to show you that they mirror you and relate to you, so you feel disarmed and you feel comfortable opening up about what you've experienced or what you want. And they can work in one of a few ways. They might be kind of like a handler person where they come in your life acting as a friend, and then they subtly influence you behind the scenes. They influence the type of content you make. They influence your spiritual beliefs. Maybe you weren't into conspiracies before you met this person, or maybe you had a small interest, but they're going to take that interest that you had and they're going to expand that narrative so you believe in their narrative. So things like that happen. Religious groups and occult groups have also, and the reason why I'm so adamant about my personal Facebook group is because I've been targeted by a lot of these groups. So I know I wouldn't have known that I was a target or that they were part of these groups targeting me. But for whatever reason, my dreams or, spirit guides or whatever, like showed things to me and revealed things to me. And I saw the truth and have some hard evidence that I can't talk about on here. So you'll have to take my word for it. But I'm not the only one who's been, recruited by these agencies too. And a lot of people don't even know that they're being recruited or that they're being influenced by these people. And here's another scary thing. All those substances I mentioned earlier, the pink drinks in our childhood, the fact that they were always giving us medicine as kids, like take Benadryl for this cough, or, assuming that's Benadryl, or like you have to get vaccinated, or you have to, there's this medication or fluoride that you have to take as part of whatever physicians recommend for children, okay? All of these things could have had an effect on our brains. Like they do, but how long of a effect do they have? Is this the reason why we have so many missing gaps in our memory, where we just drugged up our whole lives, especially if we were in the GATE program? Were they grooming us for something? The other thing I've talked about on my channel is Hollywood, how they use Hollywood and very creative. Are you a GATE kid with an exceptional ability in the creative or performing arts? Did you end up wanting to go to Hollywood, or did you end up going to Hollywood so somebody could sign a contract with you and then turn you into an industry puppet and use you to share their narrative and their beliefs in a certain religion, or to make you into a very marketable brand so you could sell their products and push the behavioral habits of society. And I'm thinking of the movie Josie and the Pussycats right now, because that's a great example of how they use people in the industry. And they had her listen to subliminal messaging on the music that Josie, the lead singer of the band, was listening to right before she kind of split up from her friends, because they were trying to, they took 3 girls who were in the equal front of the band, and then they made Josie the star, so they pitted them against each other. This is what these groups and these people trying to infiltrate us are doing. They're trying to pit people against each other. They're trying to isolate you. So anyone who comes into your life and wants you to get super personal with them and share them, and then tries to pit you against other people and tries to have personal conversations with you and go really deep with you without knowing you, that is absolutely a red flag. And I'm not saying that everyone who does that has negative intentions, but I'm saying you should very much use your discernment when dealing with people like that, because that is absolutely a manipulative technique that people can use and have been trained to use. But for what? So again, do they want us to work in the military? Do they want us to pilot their UAFs in our sleep? Do they want us to be Hollywood superstars or local influencers, and they want to steer the narrative because if too many people awaken, then they don't get to stay in power anymore? And there's actually a reason that this is happening astrologically, and that's another thing I wanted to touch on in this video. What does it mean to us now? Regardless of what they wanted to do with us or use us for, why does it all matter now? Why is it all coming to light now? So if you were in the gifted program, especially in the 90s, you are having, Saturn is coming around to the same place that it was at that time in your life. So since Saturn comes back to the same point in your chart, Saturn completing a full cycle on the zodiac wheel in your personal natal chart is a cycle of maturity. It means you've been through the whole lesson of the zodiac wheel. So now you're looking at it as an adult, as a mature person. And now that, I think that's why a lot of this is coming up for a lot of the 90s, 80s babies especially. We're having a reawakening of this because the Saturn cycle is returning. And even in the 80s and 70s, that means yours might have come around to full maturity a couple of years prior to the 90s babies whose Saturn, not Saturn return, unless you're 27, then you would be having a Saturn return between 27 and 30. If you're between 27 and 30 right now, you're having a Saturn return, but that is different than Saturn being at the place in our chart where it was when we were in the gifted program. So it would have been at our chart when we were around 7 years old, right? So it's creating like a square, a hard angle in our chart. So that can be something that creates trauma. And now we've been through the full cycle of karma, but now we are seeing it from new eyes. We're awakening to this trauma and karma that happened to us as kids. So that's one way to look at it, especially because when we first started to be in the GATE program, we would have been in during the Saturn in Pisces season, and Saturn in Pisces. So this is also like late 80s babies who had Saturn in Pisces or who attended the program in the late 80s. You would have had Saturn in Pisces, and then the generation before that, probably like again in the 80s, I'm guessing, because I don't have the chart in front of me, but before it goes into Aries, which was, I think, I want to say it was either 93 or 97, sometime around mid 90s. And before that, it would have been Pisces, which is the subconscious mind, the dream world, the astral realm, spirituality. Aquarius before that, which is technology, the higher mind, the future. And then right before Aquarius, it would have been Capricorn, top-down systems, control from the top down, structures, organizations, things happening in secret. So if you're looking at all those energies, and then if you want to go back even further to the 60s and the 70s, then you would have gone through what was before Capricorn is Saturn and Sagittarius, which is the education system. And again, higher learning, higher models of learning and philosophies. And then before Sagittarius, it was Scorpio, which is the underworld, which is what's happening in secret, which is what is taboo, which I've talked about in other videos. That is why the program was more secretive and covert, is that the word I'm looking for? In earlier decades than it was in the 80s and 90s. Okay, so that's why astrology is super important to look into. So now the other important thing when we're looking at what does it mean now, where is it in your chart now, because you're deprogramming that in your chart right now. So if you have it in your third house, for example, if you're experiencing this awakening in your third house, that is the house of communication, of your nervous system. So you could be having a nervous system reset, resetting trauma. You could be being called to share your story on a bigger platform, on the internet. You could be called to write a book. You could be called to write an album, a song. Because Gemini in the third house is all about communication, and it's all about your local community. So if it's in the ninth house, for example, that would be education abroad. Maybe you're going to be called to travel abroad to, that's where your deprogramming is taking place, and your purpose has to do with teaching abroad or teaching about philosophies or religion in some way, or different beliefs and belief systems, because that's all the stuff that Sagittarius runs. Okay, so if you know anything about astrology and you have your chart handy, you're going to want to look at where 1 to 2 degrees of Saturn is in your chart right now, and also look at Neptune, because Neptune is what is dismantling old illusions and breaking down old systems, and Saturn is where we wake up to our purpose and our sense of responsibility and where we're getting serious in life. So when you have those two planets together, it's like, I'm waking up to my spiritual mission. I take my spiritual mission seriously. So I want to look at where 1 to 2 degrees of Aries is in my chart, and maybe look at the house before that where it was in Pisces. And then you're going to see what house that's in, what themes is it bringing up for you. So if you don't know anything about astrology, and if that sounds like complete gibberish to you, reach out to me personally on one of my social media sites, because I do mini readings and I think these are super important. So I offer, I'm just doing mini Saturn Neptune transit readings for a much lower price than I do for the full astrology reading. But if you want to do a deep dive into astrology, this is also something I specialize in. I've been teaching and studying astrology for 20 years now, and I work with people one-on-one. I've read probably hundreds of charts throughout my lifetime, and I follow my own. It's always so accurate, and it's one of the things that helped me really understand my mission here, because I was able to see things in an esoteric way instead of trying to rely on doctors and more of like this left brain society mind. I think because of my gate program and conditioning, I'm very open. I think I've mentioned in other videos how I would astral travel, astral project, had experiences with ETs, like premonitions, knowing things because I know them, remote viewing, all those kind of ESP senses and abilities. And I was never able to connect really with medical professionals because they have such a different way of seeing the world than I do. So it didn't make sense to me. But when I read my astrology chart and my human design chart, which is way more esoteric and metaphysical, it made sense. So that's why I get so hyped up about astrology and human design, because it changed my life. It saved my life, helped me break free from conditioning, from programming, and to trudge my own path and understand what my purpose and what my destiny is. So that's my passion. That's what I love to help wake other people up to. I want to help you see where you've been programmed, where you've been disempowered. And I want to show you in your astrology chart how you have a higher mission, that you're literally a being from the stars. And they say stars are portals. So you're from another portal, another dimension. We're all, created from stardust, as cheesy as that may sound. But there's so much science behind this, especially when you look into human design and neutrinos, because stars and planets, well, I think it's mostly the stars that emit neutrinos, but some planets do too, like Jupiter. And those neutrinos contain particles of information that travel like trillions per second, travel through other planets, planetary bodies, and they are absorbed in our skin. So they literally are absorbed and they change our DNA. So that's why especially highly sensitive people, like why you might be extra sensitive during Cancer season or Pisces season or the water months, because you're literally like a sponge and you're picking up on all these neutrinos and you're feeling it in a different way than other people are. So people that don't understand the world through the lens of astrology or metaphysics can feel very lost. And then things like medication and doctors and diagnosis and labels and all that stuff might be their only answer. But I've mentioned in other videos how, at least when I was diagnosed with many different forms of neurodivergence, they didn't ever sit right with me. And all the years I did talk therapy, like, I'm not discouraging anyone from doing therapy, but it didn't make sense. It didn't help me make sense of the world. And I would walk in there feeling like I knew more than the therapist, because I'd want to talk about attachment styles and all the things that I'd read on the internet about therapy, and they want to ask me surface level questions that are not getting to the root of my issues. and it feels like we're talking around in circles, and I quite frankly felt like a waste of my time. So it wasn't until I discovered astrology and human design that actually helped me see things from a spiritual perspective, which I think gate kids are primed to do if you grew up with ESP capabilities. So I think the occult and metaphysics stuff, if you were born in the Pluto and Scorpio generation, which rules the occult, so this is going to be 80s and 90s babies if you were born then, and even for those of you who grew up, so maybe you weren't born in that time, but maybe you were a teenager during this time, you were still affected by those energies, the Pluto and Scorpio energies, the Saturn and Scorpio energies, the Saturn and Neptune energies, which is huge. So that's what we're coming back around to, is Saturn and Pisces. That's what I meant to say. Neptune is a ruler of Pisces, which is why I said Saturn and Neptune. But we're coming back to Saturn and Neptune energies. So that's why people are reawakening to these psychic experiences that they had, because that part of your chart is active again. That's why we're having these memories, but we're seeing it from a different perspective, from a more empowered one. And we're trying to figure out, like, put the pieces together, what it all means. And there's so many answers in your astrology chart. So if you're interested in diving deep with me, again, go ahead and reach out to me on Instagram or TikTok at Statements by Alex. And if you're not on social media, I have a link in my description. I have a free Gate Kids guide for neurodivergent souls and Gate Kids and gifted and talented kids. And go ahead and enter your email, and I'll send you my free guide, which has my prices for booking as well. And I swear I wouldn't be teaching this stuff and devoting a lot of my life to it if it didn't absolutely change my life. So I have every bit of confidence that I can help you understand your higher reason for being here, especially if you're lost and you're confused, because nothing brings me more joy and happiness than giving this kind of insight to people and seeing a light turn on in their eyes, in the same way that a light turned on for me when I had somebody teach me this stuff. So thank you for watching this video. I hope it resonated. Please let me know in the comments, and please let me know, like, what do you think? What do you think? You know, I didn't even mention ET, so if anyone wants to mention aliens, like, let me know you made it to this end of this video and that maybe you have a theory about that. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you guys, and I will see you in the next video.